Okay, let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining another DevTest Community Webcast. Today's topic is User Types, Access Control, and License Reporting in DevTest 10.0. That's also known as ACL. Today we have Dan Mazzei giving the presentation. He's done a few webcasts for us before and he always does a great job. If you have any questions as we're going through today's session, you can feel free to enter them into the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Because Dan is the only presenter today, we'll collect the questions there, and then when we have a pause or at the end of the session, we'll go ahead and provide answers to those. If you'd like to hold your questions until the end of the session, we will open it up for verbal questions at the end as well. So you can hold those until the end, and I'll let you know how to unmute your line when we get closer to that time. All right, I'm going to turn the call over to Dan now. Take it away, Dan.
Hope you can hear me okay. Doing things a little remote this morning, so if there's any issues, please just let us know. Let me go ahead and share the presentation. I'll probably share the application, right? Give me 1 sec. There we go. Okay, so today we're going to talk about DevTest or service virtualization, or even application test, Lisa, whatever you want to call it. I kind of default to calling it DevTest as a suite of solutions. That includes continuous application insight, application test, and service virtualization. This applies to all of them. So we'll talk about the Access Control List, or the ACL. We'll talk about user types, users, and roles. We'll talk a little bit about the reporting, the activity report specifically, that tells us what the users did, and the usage audit report, which is a sort of licensing report. So I'll try to go slow. The reason actually that I suggested this topic was because I found a lot of people have trouble understanding how ACL works in DevTest. It's important to understand that there's a concept of authentication and authorization. So let's talk a little bit about that. Authentication is how you get into the product. And authorization is what you do once you get in. Okay, so authentication is you provide a valid username and password. Authorization, an example would be, are you allowed to perform this action, such as start a virtual service or edit a virtual service, right? The ACL is enabled by default, and we can change the ACL based on different scenarios that we'll see later. There's 3 main usage scenarios. Before you can access DevTest, you have to be authenticated with valid credentials and then authorized to perform a task. And the task would be a permission associated with a role, associated with the user, right? So again, we have authentication, which is logging in, and authorization, which is performing an action once you log in. Okay? This applies to the UIs and the CLI as well. So Workstation and Portal, as well as the APIs. Okay, so there's, talking about authorization, there's different scenarios. We do have great LDAP integration, or you can say Active Directory as an example. So one example is we can authenticate with, say, Active Directory, and then manage the users and their roles and permissions in DevTest. This is very flexible, and it gives you, I'm sorry, hang on 1 sec.
Just a reminder, while we have a minute, if you have any questions as Dan is going through his presentation, you can feel free to enter them into the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen.
All right, sorry about that, guys. So this option, the first option to authenticate with LDAP is great. It allows you to use kind of a single sign-on method so that there's not too much administration. It kind of fits with most security policies. The only negative about this approach is that you have to manage the users and the roles in DevTest. So there is still some manual user management. The second option is to authenticate with LDAP or Active Directory and use mapped roles. So you can map a default role to a group, an Active Directory group, right? And that's great. So you can have maybe it's by functional team, and this all depends on your organization, right? So we can only give examples. Maybe you have Project 1, Project 2, or Team 1, Team 2 groups, right? You can give Team 1 group, maybe that's a QA group. You can give them a QA role, QA permissions to run a test suite, but they don't have permissions to run a virtual service, for example, right? And then the other group would be a development group, and they would have access to maybe start a service and maybe run tests. So there's some flexibility there, so you can map it to groups. The third option, which is probably my favorite option, allows the most flexibility while it doesn't prevent users from getting into the solution, right? It doesn't inhibit the workflow. So you can authenticate, kind of do a single sign-on. If they have a valid directory, Active Directory credentials, they can get into the product, but they're limited because they're runtime users. They're kind of a limited role, maybe a read-only role, if you will, right? And then what we can do is we can manually go in and upgrade them, or we can assign them to a particular group in AD that gives them more permissions. But this allows everyone to access the product, which is great if they have the IP address, right, the host name. So this is kind of nice. You can manually promote users. I like this option a lot. It gives a lot of flexibility to the organization while still implementing good security. So those are your three main options. We'll also, by the way, we'll share this presentation, and there's links at the bottom of most of the slides. If you want to go to the documentation, specific areas, you can get a lot better explanation than I can give you. But this is really the overview, okay? So let's see what else we have. Okay, how do we configure it? So we can configure authentication based on one or more LDAP servers. By default, we'll use the DevTest ACL database, right? And again, as you saw in the three examples, we can also use the LDAP servers and our own internal database. So depending on which scenario you choose, that'll determine which method of authentication you're going to use. We also can automatically create the user. So if the user doesn't exist, we'll create them and add them. The point is to not block anyone, right, from getting their job done. We don't want to be too restrictive, but at the same time, we don't want everyone logging in as root or admin. Okay, that's the biggest thing. Everyone logs in as administrator, and it's hard to track things. Things can go wrong. So by making it a little bit more flexible, a little bit easier to have some sort of LDAP integration and assigning kind of default roles, it makes it a lot easier to audit and to manage the process. And there's a couple files that we need to be aware of. The main one really is authentication providers XML. And these are all in your, if you're using Windows, it's C program file, CA DevTest. It's in your Lisa install directory, Lisa home directory, your default installation path. Okay, this is your local properties, your site.properties, properties, your Lisa properties, all this stuff. There's Tratus properties, authentication providers XML is in there as well. So that's a file you're going to look at. This is an example. They provide a sort of template, right? And we give you at the top of the file. I minimized it here. But they give you kind of an explanation in the file itself, an XML file. You can open it up in a notepad, and you can see kind of the layout. So this can be a little tricky. If you go to the documentation and you look at the three usage scenarios, find the one that you're going to implement, and then we'll give you an example authentication providers XML to complement that scenario. I don't want to go through all of these now. It could take some time, but basically the name is just any arbitrary name you want to assign to it. Doesn't really have to match anything. Auto add users is going to ask you if you want to automatically add users that don't exist to the database. Authenticate only is if you just want to authenticate them and you don't want to add them or manage the permissions. Enabled, obviously, is it on or off? Type, is it LDAP or Active Directory? Default role could be the default role when they log in. It could be usually a runtime user. And then you can manually promote them to a power user. If it's mapped to a particular group, what we can do is we can give them a power user maybe for that group. Reject unmapped users if they don't map to you want this set to true. If they don't map to the Active Directory, then don't let them get in. The URL is your LDAP URL, LDAP-S, we support SSL. The user DN, you'll need that, the DN pattern, the search base, the search filter. You'll need those from your AD admin. So sometimes those can be a little tricky to get. You can also use an LDAP browser to find those out. We can help you with that if there's any issues. Okay, and then to authorize, so that's authentication. Now to authorize, right, to authenticate is to allow them in. To authorize is to let them perform certain actions. So we use a file called LDAP mappings, where we map the users to a group or a role. And we have kind of default groups, default roles, but you can change these. So these will change depending on the roles you create, and we'll see that in a bit. But here we're saying everyone in the support group is a super user, and everyone in the admin group is a SV power user, okay? And again, this is going to change based on your organization. It's really just an example. You can't really copy-paste this stuff. It needs to be thought out. It needs to be planned. So let's talk a little about users and roles now that we understand the concepts, right? Authentication and authorization. Now we'll talk about how this actually applies. How do we get permission to perform tasks? So before I show you also the demo, I want to just remind you that the user administration has been moved to DevTest Portal as of 9.9.5, 9.5.1, 10.0, 10.1. So if you're using, let's say, 8.0 or 8.5, for example, you'll be using Server Console. That functionality is still there. It's just been moved over the portal to the portal along with the reporting and the user administration. So we'll be using Portal for this demo, for this example. You can accomplish the same tasks in Server Console. So we have default users, and each are assigned a role, and each role is assigned permissions. So really just what you have to know is that a user has a name, that's a role, and a permission is assigned to a role. Okay? So you can create a username. That username is assigned to the role of QA manager, and the QA manager has permission to edit test, create test, right? So there are some default roles that we have, default users as well associated with those roles. SV power user, for example, right? So if you go into the portal, you go on the left to settings, you go to access control, and then if I click on roles or users, I'll see the different roles and users, right? Here I'm showing you the user SV power, and once you click on that on the right-hand side, you'll see the user ID, the name, description of it, and then you can assign roles and really permissions that are assigned to those roles. So I'll show you that. The standard user accounts are good to know. I would strongly advise that you modify these, that you create your own by copying the existing ones and giving your own name to them and modifying the permissions. Right, this is going to be unique to the organization. It's going to either be based probably on if you're maybe project-based, maybe you have a center of excellence and there's only a handful of people that really need super user access. Everyone else can get runtime permissions. It can be runtime users that get read-only access. Or if you want to do it per team, maybe, right, you could do it per team. So the default user account's admin, right? You're going to log in as admin. You have access to everything. There's also sysadmin, which is a system administrator, right? There's also the power user, SV power, test power, right? Test power is a test application test runner, test creator. SV power, service virtualization power, is going to create services, run services, access the VSEs, right, restart them. So we can see that here if we go to roles. Let's say we have a runtime user, a runtime role, and we can see the permissions all the way on the right associated with that role. So the right-hand side is what is assigned to that role. On the left-hand side of that, to the left of those arrows, is what's available and unassigned. The unassigned is something they can't do. The available is something they can't do. And the assigned is something they can do. Okay? So this role of runtime user, I can assign to a user called default user, right? And have everyone get those permission levels. So again, we have standard roles just as we have standard users. These are examples. You want to modify them based on how your organization is laid out and how the product's being used. In this example, we have SV power user, which is a test administrator, SV power, and a test runner roles. And the test power is test power, test observer, load tester, and also a user role. You can see the permissions associated with those roles. So the standard permissions, the permissions are grouped, right? So if you're looking for a certain action, it's going to be grouped under a parent. So it's probably easier if I show that to you. So I'll kind of skip over that. Let me show you another thing is the user activity report. We'll see this too, okay? The activity report shows you what actions were performed by each user. It's an audit log, kind of. It's a history of permissions. And every action that's done in the portal or in Works is logged and can be viewed. Right, so it's good for tracking. It's good for security and audit purposes. I'll show you that. Yeah, you just log in to portal. On the left-hand side, you go to reporting, go to administration, and you go to user activity. Okay, and what you'll see is a list with timestamps, the user, and the action performed. And then we can filter, just like we can filter all the other reports. You can actually look for denied actions or allowed actions or search per user. Maybe a virtual service was deleted and you want to find out who deleted that virtual service. This is excellent for that. Okay, so it's great that we have that functionality. This is showing you the denied logins, right? This is good to take a look at. Okay, licensing. Let's touch on that topic too. And these are a lot of kind of different topics. They're all sort of related. So I'm sure you might have some questions. You might want to go deeper. That's great. I'm just going to hold those till the end. So the licensing was changed a bit. Changes sometimes. And currently it's licensed by the maximum, concurrent, or simultaneous user sessions. Okay, that's important to know. It's the maximum concurrent. So you could have 500 users assigned, right, with different roles and permissions, but if only 10 are using it at a time, you're only going to be assessed for those 10. right? Not the 500 that are actually created, but the active users at a time. Right? So that's very important to know. So really the user, the customer, the administrator is responsible for license compliance with the terms of the contract, and it's based on the number of simultaneous or concurrent users accessing the program. We don't enforce licensing, so we're not going to block you. There is a scenario where we'll do every 6 months, every year, we'll do a true up. We'll ask for the audit logs, something like that, and you can take a look. But we recommend you do it maybe every month, every 3 months, every quarter, and kind of manage it yourself, right? We don't want to prevent you from using the product. We don't want to prevent someone from getting their job done. At the same time, we want to make it easy for you to understand how the product's being used. Okay? And the registry forwards all this information to the enterprise dashboard. So what you're seeing is the different components, DevTest components, will all communicate with the registry, and the registry will communicate this to the enterprise dashboard. Okay? So this is a required component, the enterprise dashboard, and this is what's going to give you the usage statistics. So concurrent user, what is a concurrent user? Right, so that's a very good question. So it's based on the simultaneous users accessing the program. We don't prohibit you from accessing it. We do log it, right? You're entitled to have, based on your license, a specific number of concurrent users, power users, or runtime users, right? So maybe you have a 10-pack of power users. You can have 10 power users using the product at once. You can have 500 assigned that role, but if only 10 are logged in, then you're in compliance, or less, of course, right? A concurrent user, so an active session connected to the server directly or indirectly is an active session. If it's initiated by an individual, a device, or a process, it's counted. Okay, it could be a workstation, it could be portal, web browser, or both, right? So let me give you some examples. If you're using workstation and portal on the same machine, it's only one use. Okay, and that's the same for any combination of UIs or CLIs on the same or different machines. If more than one user logs in with the same username on different machines, each is counted, okay, different machines. If a user logs in with the same username to access different applications, that's fine, that's a single use, okay? So it's based on the number of connections by user, by machine, right? And it's based on login and logout records, okay? And we record this too. You can see that in the user activity report and the audit log. And there's actually a timeout setting that you can set, so you're automatically logged out, or you can automatically log out a user after a certain threshold. Maybe it's 15 minutes with no activity, so that it won't count towards your max, right? Let me show you what this report looks like. So let's say monthly or quarterly you go in and create a report, right? You'll see the concurrent sessions with the maximum number of users, and that's really what you want to monitor, okay? So you'll go to your enterprise dashboard, you'll go on the top right to export usage audit data, and you'll see an Excel spreadsheet, and the first tab is going to be a sort of summary. And this is going to give you the date for the report, right? You'll specify the last month or 3 months, right? And then you'll see below it, per user type, the number of times you hit the threshold. Okay? So this is the overview tab. It provides the details on the extent of your license usage. Here we have the highest concurrent usage was at least one time. Instances of max use is 1 for application test power user, and we see max concurrent use counts is 3. Okay, so that's one example, and you can see it for the other, the CAI user, the SV power user, the runtime user as well, right? And what you want to look for is if the instances of max use count go up, and they, 2, 3, 5, over time, that means you're hitting your threshold more and more and more. And it's probably time to either reevaluate how you assign your roles, or to get more licenses. Right? They give you a pretty little graph, right? This is in, I think this is in 10. You can use that, and then we can see here what they're accessing as well, right? So this is by day, and this is telling you what they're accessing. Okay, so this, let's say a test power user is using Workstation, and is anyone using the invoke? Yeah, so we have another one who's using the API, a few are using Server Console, and so you can see who's most active, what components they're using, how many times you hit the threshold, right? I'll tell you here, the total sessions is the sum of the counts for the reported user. So total sessions, let's say for the bottom one, test power user, is the total of console, invoke, test runner, and Workstation. Okay? So that's probably very useful for you. And then if you want to know what component they're using, you can see the components. All right? Okay, so it's kind of tricky managing this. We want to give you some suggestions how to optimize this so you can kind of maintain compliance easily. You can manage your users without much extra work, right? You want to focus on the product, on the solution that you're working on the services, and not on the product, right? I'm not managing DevTest, right? So we suggest you configure LDAP or AD integration, right? You'll use authentication providers and LDAP mappings. Take some time to sit down and think about how you could use this within your organization. You'll have to talk with your administrator, your LDAP admin, your user, your security team, right, about how it's implemented and what would work best for you. You don't want them to have to add too many users to their groups, and you don't want to have to really manage things on yourself. So it's kind of a balancing act. We definitely recommend you create groups for users based on functional role, right? So it's probably easier for you to manage, and it won't take as much dependence on, let's say, the security team, right? So you won't have to reach out to them for changes. So it's good to create groups. Definitely put it in a timeout value for Portal. You can make it, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. I would suggest you do that. There's a property you can set in local properties. It's called registry max user lifetime seconds. Definitely set that. It's in seconds, not minutes, so don't set it to 15 seconds. And it helps if you assign, if you're using a kind of a center of excellence model where you have maybe one DevTest install and you're managing that, this can be very good. But if you're using a distributed environment, what you want to do is assign really an admin to manage the users in those accounts, to manage the users in that team, right? So you want to assign someone responsible for administering DevTest in each of those functional groups, right? A deputy, okay? So that's pretty much everything. It's a lot, right? So feel free to ask questions, go back and review it. We'll post the Q&A, we'll post the presentation, and I'll give you a quick walkthrough, and if you guys have questions, you can stop me. So let me just pause sharing for a minute so I can open my desktop. Okay. So I have a DevTest installation. I'm going to log in as admin. I want you to see everything, okay? This happens to be a 951. Project doesn't really matter. But if I go over here on the left, please, we start fresh. So I'm just logging into Portal. This is 951. I'm logged in as admin. Okay. Go to the left under Settings, and I have Access Control. Okay. The two important things I'm going to look at are roles and users. So let's take a look at users first. Click on that. I have a role. Let's look at my role, right? I'm logged in as admin, so we'll take a look at the admin user. Click on that. On the right-hand side, I see a user ID, a name, a description, okay? I can also go here and change my password, right? I can go here and I can copy the admin user, or I could delete the admin user, okay? And then down here, this is what we want, is the role associated with the admin user. So I have a super user role assigned to the admin user. Super user is you know, root is God, right, is admin. If I go to now roles, let's see what permissions are assigned to that role. So admin user is a super user role with permissions of, click on super user, and on the right-hand side I'll see everything, right? I've got everything assigned. And you can actually filter too by the type of user. There are some nice categories that you can use. But let me expand this. You can see I'm a user and role administrator. I'm a resource admin. I'm a test admin, which includes staging a test, staging a suite, stopping a test, killing a test. When you assign the permissions, I would recommend you review the permissions for killing and stopping VSEs and tests, because there may be times when you want to give someone the ability to run a test or start a virtual service and not be able to kill it or move it. Okay, so those are important ones to take a look at. Here we've got the VSE server, right? Is the VSE, the virtual service environment, right? So if I go over here and I go to monitor, go to VSEs, this is can they start or stop the VSE itself. If I go to DevTest Server Administrator, right, this is going to tell me the components, right? So my sysadmin user has the ability to start and stop components. He's manage the system, right? So that's what I give him. So that's the whole list. You can go user by user and role by role and see what's in it. So let's take a look at SV Power. Let's just see what's here. You'll see that the SV Power user is assigned these roles, but these are available. So they're available. They're unassigned. So he or she does not have the ability to create users. Power user cannot create users. Only the admin or the super user, right, can do that. Right? Cannot manage the resource groups. Certain things that can't be done with the VSE is stop a VSE, right? This is what we said. Maybe you can start it, and maybe you can start a service, but you don't want to kill it, right? You want to be careful with those sorts of destructive permissions. Resetting or stopping the simulators, right? Things like that. And then there's some reporting things. So let's take a look at test runner or runtime too. Let's just see what's under here. Okay, so report. Okay, so test runner does not have the ability, I guess as the name implies, can run a test, right, and stop a test, but can't view a report, such as, let's take a look at the administration tab, and then we'll take a look at the user activity report. So reporting, administration, I only have one option. This is a user activity report. So we'll click on that, and this is very configurable. I performed some actions just so we could get some data. So we have a time frame we can change. I'll make this go back to like Sunday or Monday. We'll set that. You can also click up here, last 7 days. So now we have a time frame. We're saying allowed or denied. Let's do denied. Let's see if anyone got denied during that time frame. And we'll do it for all roles, all users. I don't care if it was to log on to the system or start a test, but we'll see log on. Okay, so SV admin tried to log on. He was denied. Let's see what else. Okay, so system administrator, right, can start or stop components, but can't view tests. So that was denied. Okay, you can export this as a PDF or Excel, a CSV. Right, there's standard kind of reporting functionality that you can do with this. That's that. The other thing I could do is log in as another user and show you what happens to really, it just grays out what you're not able to do. So let's take a look at the user list. Let me log in as maybe SV Power. I'll log out. Try that again. So instead of admin, now I'm logged in as SV Power, and I try to go to access control to add a user, and I'm not able to. It's grayed out, right? Access denied, I can't. If I look at reporting and I go to the administration to see the ACL report, I can't, right? So a power user is very powerful, can do a lot of things, but cannot manage users. Okay, so that's an example. If I do another user, there's a QA user. Okay, that'll give me an error in the log. That's good. Some issue with the keyboard. But you get the idea. Let's try T-Power. Okay, so test power user can't even use the agents. Can use CAI? Yeah, it doesn't have. This is a test user, right, for running and managing tests. So it doesn't have access to the application insight functionality. Let's take a look at the VSE. We go here and we want to do something with the VSE. Look, we can't start a VSE. So things will be grayed out if you don't have permissions, okay? And you can't go through the API or the CLI. It's not going to work either. It's going to deny you, right? Because there's an actual check on the back end. So it's not just through the portal. That, and I can show you. You want to see the enterprise dashboard real quick? Just open up the enterprise dashboard. So on the first page, top right-hand corner, I click on the gear icon, and I'll go to Export Usage Audit Data. And I don't have Excel installed here, but it'll at least let me specify a range, and I can download it, and then I'll have to copy it over to my desktop. Give me 1 sec. So here we have, and I'm using an unlimited license, so you're not going to see any thresholds hit. But you'll see the date range. You'll see the chart of users. You'll see this is if you have the performance license. You'll see the historical usage, and then you'll see it by component type, right? Just as we saw in the screenshots. I can actually show you a better one if you want, but you get the idea. So let me open it up for work questions.
Just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can enter them into the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I will also open up the line to verbal questions at this point, so if you'd like to ask a question over the phone, you can click #6 on your telephone keypad to do that. We do have a question in already. We have a question asking, is there a way for users to change their password?
Yes, if you want to allow them to, we recommend that if you're using single sign-on or the Active Directory integration, I can show you that too. It'll be tied to their AD password, right? So they won't have to. So if I go to C program files, CA, so this is my Lisa home directory. I have DevTest installed in.
Oh, you're not showing your screen. Sorry.
Sorry. So to configure the LDAP, right, I'll go to C program files, CA DevTest, or I'll go to if it's Linux, I think it's you can put an opt maybe. But this is my Lisa home directory. And I've got what my local properties files. I can specify my timeout in this property file. I can specify my authentication provider here. And I can specify my mappings here. Okay. And again, I don't have, oh, there we go, Notepad++, I did. So if you open the file, you'll see they give you an example, an explanation of what everything is. There's also in the documentation. And then we give you here, maybe this is a good example to use. But in the documentation, we'll go through the 3 scenarios, and we'll give you examples here. Okay. By default, again, we use the DevTest ACL, right, or the legacy ACL. And if I go to LDAP mappings, you just want to see that real quick. I can specify the users and the roles here. Okay. Just like up here, I have my groups, right? So this would be my example. Developers and administrators have test power, administrator has administrator, and test observer is assigned to the user group. And the reason the colors show up is because of the way it's opened, but this is what you would have down here below. Just keep an eye out for the arrows, which denote the comments. So when you're actually editing the properties files, you want it to be below here, below the example. Any other questions?
Yeah, follow up to that. By default, will the password never expire?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer to that. I don't believe it will, but I'll double check. If you want to take a look at the FAQ, we'll post the questions, the Q&A afterwards, and I'll put the answer in there, and I'll also put it in the discussion below the event. I'll put it in there too.
Okay.
And again, the links to some of the documentation, if you did want to look at the properties files, right, or the examples, are in the slide deck. But I can give you the steps for some of those if you're curious. For example, the timeout, right? So you'd go to the local properties and you would add a new line. I can give you that. That's no problem.
Okay, we have another question in. Can we set permissions on a project level?
So permissions are per user. They're not per project.
Okay, another question. It seems that every user knows the password of administrator is admin. As a real administrator, should I change my password for the admin user?
Yeah, definitely. Even if you don't use the LDAP integration, I recommend changing the default passwords and giving each, say there's a group of 5 of you, right? Give each one their own username. Maybe it's first name dot last name or first initial, last name, whatever it may be. Just have people log in as a best practice with their own user, right? you can still give them the same permissions. It's just going to record it as a different username, and it makes for some better tracking, and something gets deleted by mistake or something, you know what happened.
Okay, another question is, can we create a group account or not as per system logon?
Can you explain that one a little bit more? Can we create a group account for system? So when you log, if you're using a shared remote desktop maybe, right? Everyone's logging into a remote desktop and logging in. You can log in with the same user, right? But only one person's going to be using that. We used to charge per workstation. Right now you can use Workstation or Portal. You can use it from your laptop, right? You can use it from your own machine. You don't have to have, you're not going to be charged or billed for each one. So it doesn't really make sense anymore to have a central one for people to log into. You really don't need it. It's not necessary, if that helps answer that question.
By group account, he says that he means multiple users added in one group and access the same login in their system. Is that what you had just addressed, Dan?
Added in one group and access login in their system. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So, and there's different scenarios too. So I can give you some more information on the different scenarios. That would probably help.
Okay, you're welcome. Any other questions, guys? Once again, Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or if you'd like to ask a verbal question, it's #6 on your telephone keypad to unmute yourself. Another question in how to manage this in a Linux system.
You would still do it through Portal. Portal is it's a web server, and you can access it from any machine. You don't have to actually install Workstation, right? You can just type in the host name, the /devtest. You can just log into it from a web browser, and you can access the administrative, the user control, the ACL list in Portal in a web browser. You would use, you would need a UI, so you need GNOME or KDE or something. If you're actually doing it from a Linux box, you would need some graphical interface to manage the users. I believe there is a command line for it as well, but I don't know if you want to go to that extent. But we do support this ACL, this access control, on the Linux box installation. So it would be controlled the same way through the portal if the DevTest install were on a Linux system.
All right, any more questions, guys? All right, if there are no more questions, we're going to go ahead and close up for today. So thank you everyone so much for joining. Thanks, Dan, for another great presentation. As Dan had mentioned, we will be posting the slides, the recording, the Q&A transcript, and I think that's it. But all of that will be compiled into one webcast recap post on the community, so keep an eye out for that. We do have another session coming up soon, and that is, I think it's May 10th, and it is the newest version of TDM, so it's kind of just going to walk you through what's new in that. We do have a lot of sessions lined up for this year. We just planned it all the way through to next year, so keep an eye out for some really cool topics coming later in the year, and you can find all of those on the DevTest community. If you have any questions after today's session, you can feel free to post them in the DevTest community. We always have people monitoring that space to answer questions, so we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. All right, well, thank you everyone so much for joining, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.